Look, so this writing notes video is another video for graduate students, but also undergrads who are looking to go to graduate school. What we're going to talk about is how to figure out your scholarly focus. Now, this is primarily directed at English majors because that's my own field, that's what I know the most about. But a lot of this information is going to be relevant to other people in the humanities, and probably less relevant, but possibly still useful for people in the social sciences, maybe even the hard sciences. But the particular focus that I'm going to have is on English majors, because again, that's my own background, and so I can talk in the most detail about that. Hopefully the basic processes that I'm suggesting will be useful to those of you in other fields. But basically, when you are preparing to go to graduate school, and I've talked about this in other videos, graduate school is different to undergraduate studies because undergrad's purpose is largely to give you a rounded education, at least in the liberal arts tradition. So liberal arts colleges, along with state schools in the US, more traditional schools in other countries, the UK, Canada, throughout the Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, West Africa, all of these places, the tradition is to educate students in a wide range of disciplines on at least a basic level. This is the goal of undergraduate. The goal of graduate studies is much more focused. It's about specialization. What specifically do you want to do? And this is why, generally speaking, graduate programs don't have general education requirements or things like this. So if you go to grad school for English, you don't also have to take Biology 101 or music appreciation or whatever equivalent sort of courses there are. You are only, for the most part, taking English classes. You may take classes in other disciplines depending on how your program is set up and what they allow you to do, what you're interested in doing, etc., etc. But generally speaking, you are in graduate school to learn English, to learn the discipline of literary studies or rhetoric and composition or creative writing, whatever it is. So how do you figure out what you actually want to do? Now, this is not the same question as something like, what do you want to major in undergrad? That's a different issue, although generally speaking, most people who go to graduate schools will pursue the same thing that they majored in undergrad. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about here. Because an undergrad major, like an undergraduate degree itself, is still fairly generalized. You tend to take a wide range of different courses rather than focusing on something in particular. Now, again, graduate school is about specialization, and so rather than saying, I'm an English major, you're going to focus. Now, if you go into a standalone master's program, so for clarification, there are some different ways that graduate programs work. And this should maybe be a separate video, but I'm going to cover it here because... No, I'm going to make a separate video about it. Never mind. So if you go into a standalone master's program, this is a good time to decide what you want to specialize in. If you go into a combined master's and PhD program, you want to have a better sense of this before you start the program. And you definitely want to know what your specialization is going to be prior to starting a doctoral program, a standalone doctoral program. So, how do you actually do this? Well, first off, presuming that you've got an English bachelor's, or you're about to get an English bachelor's and you're applying to graduate schools, one of the first things that you want to be thinking about is the type of, or the track of English that you're interested in. Are you a literature person? Are you a rhetoric and composition person? Or are you a creative writing person? Generally, you will have a sense of this, I think, by the time you get to your last year of an undergraduate program. The majority, I think, statistically, of English majors are literature people, are interested in literature primarily, with creative writing being second, and I think Ret Comp tends to be the smallest group. Though there's a lot of Ret Comp jobs right now in higher education, and I am going to make a separate video on higher education and the academic job market and how it sucks so much. So that's a treat forthcoming for you. So once you've figured out your particular track, you want to then figure out within that discipline what you're interested in specializing in, or what broad focus you're interested in taking. So if you're a Ret Comp person, honestly, Ret Comp is the strand of these three that I know the least about. I know there are people who focus specifically in composition and in teaching writing as such. There are people who focus on rhetoric and are sort of theoretical rhetoricians. There are people who focus on business and professional writing, people who focus on technical writing, things like this. So you want to figure out where you want to go. And a lot of that question may end up being, what do you want to do with that job? Because if you're interested in something like professional and technical writing, there's a lot of opportunities outside of academia for that. If you're interested in rhetoric or composition, those, I think, tend to be much more sort of academic focused approaches, but because they're still writing degrees, there will be a lot of employment opportunities outside of the academy still. If you are a creative writer, the big way that creative writing is broken up in terms of disciplines is by genre. So are you a poet? Are you a fiction writer? Are you a creative nonfiction writer? Are you a drama person? Are you a film and TV screenwriting person? These are the things that you want to figure out, basically, is what genre are you interested in doing? And if you are a lit person, the broadest way in which lit studies tends to be broken up is by geographic location. So the big ones are Americanists, British literature people, or world literature people. At least in the US, and I think in the UK as well. Now that is a somewhat unhelpful designation, generally speaking, particularly world literature, which includes an incredibly broad range of things. And actually in recent years on the job market, I've seen a lot of calls for people who do specifically African literature. I've seen a lot of calls for people who do specifically Latinx literature. I've seen some calls, especially this year, for people who do Asian literature or Asian American literature. So really, even if you identify primarily as a world literature person, you're going to specialize more than that, probably. The other thing that you may choose to do as a literature person is to become what's called a generalist. Now, I'll caution you, because even generalists, and I'm a generalist, I tend to sell myself in that way, but even generalists have particular areas that they focus on. So once you've figured that out, once you've figured out what sort of geographic area you're interested in terms of the literature that you want to study, the next question that you want to ask is going to be the time period. And for this, it helps to know a little bit about literary periodization, which is an incredibly problematic concept. I will make a video about periodization at some point. But basically, this is the idea that there are different phases of the literary history of a particular area. So if we take British literature, for instance, which is one of my major areas, we have medieval literature. We have early modern literature, which is the Renaissance period from about 1485 or so up through maybe the Restoration in 1660. We have what's sometimes called long 18th century, which would be from about the Restoration up through the beginning of the Romantics era in around 1795 or so. Then we have the Romantics era, which is about 1795 up through the reign of Victoria. The Victorian period, obviously during Victoria's age, which sometimes sort of bleeds through into what's chronologically the Edwardian age. I was losing periodicity slightly there. So sometimes the Victorian era is sort of thought to go up through the beginning of World War I. Sometimes some people say, nope, it ends with the death of Victoria. Then you have the modernist period, roughly World War I up through, say, the 1950s. Then you have the postmodern era, which also sort of coincides with the post-colonial period, from about the 1950s, 1960s. Some people say 1968 as the start of the postmodern era, up through the present. So these eras, broadly speaking, all have different thematic concerns, different approaches, different styles that are dominant, different genres that are more important, etc., etc. And so you want to figure out which period you want to work in. So, for instance, so if we follow this sort of chain of decisions that you need to make, you've decided that you're a literature person. You've decided that you want to focus on British literature, and maybe you choose Victorian literature. You're really interested in mid to late 1800s, mid to late 19th century. One of the next decisions that you need to make, like creative writing people, is what genre you primarily want to focus on. Are you interested in Victorian poetry? Are you interested in Victorian fiction? Are you interested in Victorian drama? Are you interested in Victorian nonfiction? I mean, there are people who make careers of reading things like Darwin. So, do you want to read the novels of Charles Dickens and whoever? Do you want to read the plays of Oscar Wilde and Bernard Shaw? Do you want to read the poetry of Browning and Rossetti and whoever? Tennyson? This is one of the decisions that you need to make to figure out what specifically you want to focus on. And this is essentially the main sort of set of decisions that you have to make. And so once you've made these decisions, I had talked about this in a previous video, this idea of when you apply to graduate school, you choose a graduate school based on the people who work there. So if you are interested in British literature, Victorian poetry, let's say, you want to find graduate programs that have Victorian poetry specialists teaching in them. And those are the programs that you want to apply to. So again, this is part of the strategic decision that you need to make in order to make sure that you are going to a graduate program where you're going to have people who are prepared to help you learn the things that you want to learn. So that's, again, this is the basic process for figuring out what your scholarly focus is going to be. And again, if you're in a different discipline, say history or classics or the arts, if you're in theater, whatever it is, the same kind of process is going to apply. What you want to figure out, though, is what are the specific decisions you need to make within your discipline. So what questions, what decisions, what potential tracks are there open to you in your discipline, and then which ones are most appealing to you.